And so, in terms of practical applications for what do we do with Easter? What does Easter mean for our lives? I mean, this is the story of Easter, but what does it actually mean? Well, some people would say, first of all, that it means that after we die, we go to heaven. That God, in raising His Son Jesus Christ, was showing us that death will not win. That we go to heaven after we die. So some people's focus about Easter is all about heaven and where we go after we die. I think, this is my own opinion, that Easter is not just about heaven, it's about how we live here on earth. And it's about how our lives are different because of the hope that Easter promises to us. Easter does assure us that life doesn't end at death. But it also opens up to us the possibilities of how we live here on earth. And first of all, it means that we live without fear. We don't have to be afraid. The first thing that was said to the earliest witnesses of the resurrection, when they saw the risen Christ, the words were said, "Do not be afraid." That word comes over 365 times in the Bible, in our scriptures. Over 365 times that phrase appears, "Do not be afraid." And I think fear is one of the greatest enemies we have in the world. Fear of the unknown. Fear paralyzes us, and it keeps us from living life, from engaging in life fully. When we're afraid, we shut down. We build walls between each other because we're afraid. And so the resurrection of Jesus Christ, when we talk about Easter, it's about being freed from fear in order that we might have faith in God. When we are freed from fear, we believe in God, and we believe that God takes away our fear and allows us to live life fully, and that we don't have to be afraid. I think fear is one of the worst enemies we have, and that faith trumps fear. Faith overcomes fear. And when we have faith, we don't have to be afraid. Another thing that I think Easter means is that despair and suffering will never have the last word. When people look at the story of Easter, they look at Good Friday and Jesus suffering and dying on the cross, and people can relate to that because there are many experiences in life in which we suffer and we fall into despair. And I imagine that everyone in this room, of every faith in this room, that all of us have known suffering. All of us have cried tears. Every one of us has known hard times in life in one way or another. We've seen loved ones die. We've seen difficult situations. We've been separated from people we care about. All of us can understand what it means to be in despair and to suffer. And Easter, to me, is about God's light that breaks into the midst of our suffering and says, this suffering and death will not have the last word. That God loves us so much that God will not allow suffering to be the last and defining moment of our lives. That God's light and love will enter into our situations and raise us up. Just as God raised up His Son Jesus Christ, Easter to me means that God is still a God of Easter who raises up people who are in suffering, people who are dying, people who are lonely, people who are broken. That God is in the business of resurrection, raising us up and giving us hope to live. Our scriptures say that suffering produces endurance, and endurance produces character, and character produces hope, and hope never fails us because God's love has been poured into our hearts. I believe that Easter is about God pouring God's love into our hearts in a way that raises us up. So Easter to me is not just about an event that happened 2,000 years ago. Easter is about a God who is always raising up God's people now. That God is at work in the world today, in our lives, lifting us up above the despair and the suffering that we all experience. I think that, and I don't want to gloss over this too lightly, that Easter is about the destruction of death. Death cannot win. I think that's what Easter is proclaiming. Death cannot win. Love will always win. Love will always win. I think that's the bottom line of Easter. Love wins. When you have a tug of war in your heart between hatred and love, hatred might win for a season, but it won't last. Love's going to win. Love's always going to win. That's who God is. We believe God is love. And if God is love, and God is God, God's love is always going to win, no matter what. So that's kind of what that's where my humble explanation of Easter. I can tell you lots of big theological terms, but to me that's what it's about. It's about a love that will not quit. It will not fail. It will never give up. It will always seek to raise up and win.